Hey everyone, welcome back to Infinite Podcast. I'm here with Simon, and today we're diving into something pretty cool, the origins of the MVP, or minimum viable product, strategy right out of Silicon Valley. It's fascinating how this approach essentially revolutionized tech startups by encouraging them to launch basic versions of their products to test the waters before going all in. This idea fundamentally shifted how companies brought ideas to market. For example, tech giants like Dropbox started as a simple video explaining their product concept. What do you think kickstarted this whole MVP trend, Simon?
Oh man, Joe, the MVP thing is like the Swiss Army knife of startup strategies. I reckon it all kicked off because programmers and entrepreneurs were itching to break free from the old school suit and tie corporate chains. They wanted to be fast, loose, and cheap. Throw something out there, see if it sticks, then rev it up or toss it based on real feedback. Plus, who wants to dump loads of cash and time into something that might just bomb? Not me.
Absolutely. It's all about being lean, right? Let me break it down a bit. This whole MVP buzz started as a way to iterate fast without busting the budget. You're spot on. These guys didn't want to wait years polishing a product only to find out nobody wanted it. It's like throw it out there, get feedback, tweak it, and push it out again. Slashing the risk of big, costly flops made this strategy super appealing. Plus, getting real users interacting with your product early, that's invaluable.
Man, totally. It's like inviting people to taste your half-baked cake and then asking them if it needs more sugar or maybe even some sweet flames on top. Early feedback is great, but let's hope you don't scare them away with the first bite.
Yeah, that's a solid point. There's definitely a fine line, right? Launching too early can be just as risky as waiting too long. If the MVP is too rough around the edges, it could totally turn potential supporters off. But think about this. Companies like Twitter and Foursquare, they launched with features that were pretty basic, and look where they ended up. It's about hitting that sweet spot where you've got enough to show the potential, but not so little that it backfires. What's your take on finding that balance, Simon?
Well, here's where it gets kind of dicey, right? Finding that sweet spot is more art than science. Launch too skimpy and everyone's like, what is this, a product for ants? Launch too late and you're just old news. Honestly, Joe, sometimes I think these tech geniuses get a bit ahead of themselves, throwing out MVPs like frisbees in a park and hoping someone catches one. It's tricky, no doubt.
Yeah, Simon, that's so true. It's like they're winging it a bit, right? I guess it takes guts to throw your idea out there when it's not fully baked. Uh, Makes me wonder, though, how do these MVP launchers handle the, blowback if something's received poorly? Like, do they just power through the noise or pivot entirely based on feedback? What's your take on damage control in the MVP scene?
Yeah. Damage control? It's like walking a tightrope without a net, man. These MVP maestros have to be ready to pivot faster than a cat on a hot tin roof. And power through the noise? Absolutely. They got to take that feedback, whether it's rants or raves, and tweak that MVP into something people actually want. It's less about sticking to their guns and more about being nimble, you know? Keeping one ear to the ground and adjusting on the fly. That's the real MVP magic, if you ask me.
Yeah, you nailed it there. Being nimble is absolutely critical in this game. It's like these MVP gurus need to be quick on their feet, ready to pivot at a moment's notice, but also resilient enough to push through the inevitable setbacks. And that feedback loop, man, it's crucial. They've got to really zero in on what's essential and what can be improvised as they go. Makes me think, Simon, how do you reckon this MVP model will evolve in the future? Are we looking at a more refined approach or maybe something completely new? What's your take?
Hey there, new listeners. You're tuning into a super cool chat about the MVP model, that's minimum viable product, straight out of Silicon Valley. We've been digging into how startups kick things off with a basic version of their products to get real quick feedback without breaking the bank. It's all about tossing your idea out there, getting some reactions, and tweaking as you go. Companies like Twitter started simple and scaled up based on what users really wanted. So it's all about finding that balance between too simple and overcooked. Super fascinating stuff.
Yeah, Simon, that's a spot-on summary for our new listeners. It seems like finding that balance is really an art form in itself, doesn't it? So I got to ask, given all these dynamically shifting tech landscapes, what kind of challenges do you think new startups might face trying to implement the MVP model today? Like, has the game changed with all the advancements and, increased competition?
Yeah, Joe, you hit the nail on the head. So, like with everyone and their grandma trying to launch startups these days, the market is just flooded, man. The competition's brutal, and grabbing attention, even with a slick MVP, is tougher than ever. Plus, let's not forget about tech saturation. I mean, users are more tech savvy and pickier, which means they're not just happy to see something new, they want something revolutionary. It's no longer just about being first, it's about being compelling right out the gate or getting lost in the shuffle.
Dude, you're absolutely right. The stakes are way higher now. It really pushes startups to not only come out swinging, but also to bring something to the table that stands out in this insane crowd. And this tech-savvy user base isn't just looking for gimmicks. They want real, tangible innovation. It's like the bar is constantly being raised, forcing these new players to up their game from day one. It's wild, man.
Uh, totally, Joe. But you know what? While it's wild, I kind of think there's a flip side. Pushing startups to up their game can lead to like incredible breakthroughs, sure, but also maybe a lot of burnout or rushed ideas that don't fully bake. There's this mad rush to stand out, and it might just pressure some folks to launch MVPs that aren't even V viable, you know? It's kind of like everyone's rushing to be the loudest band at the festival without tuning their instruments first. Super tricky to balance innovation and readiness, man.
Simon, that's such a real point you're making. It's honestly kind of heartbreaking to think about the pressure these creators are under, piling on just to get noticed. Makes you wonder, like, are we losing out on some potentially great innovations because they're rushed or not fully conceived? It's like they're forced to play this high-stakes game where sometimes real quality stuff might get drowned out by all the noise. What a world we're in, man.
Yeah, Joe, it's totally like a high stakes game, man. You've got all these big dreams possibly getting squashed under the weight of having to be, the next big thing right out of the gate. It really makes me wonder, do we need some kind of slow food movement, but for tech? Like where taking your time is actually valued more than being first to market. What do you think about that, Joe? Could that change the game for the better, or is it just wishful thinking?
Totally, Simon. That's a wild idea. A slow tech movement. It might just let developers fully develop their dreams without the crazy rush. Could definitely change the game, make it healthier, more sustainable. Speaking of changing the game, how about we dive back into the origins of the MVP strategy in Silicon Valley? There's a lot there that could really illuminate why and this whole fast-paced cycle started. What do you think, man?
Yeah, Joe, diving into the origins sounds like a plan. It really sets the stage for understanding this mad dash in tech. Speaking of which, it kind of makes me think about those times when the MVP model didn't just go as planned, like epic fails, right? I mean, there are some wild stories out there where things went sideways because the product was just too raw. Could be cool to unpack some of those less than stellar launches and see what went down. What do you say we shift gears and take a look at some MVPs gone wrong?
Yeah, Simon. That sounds like a killer idea. Let's dig into those cringeworthy MVP mishaps. Like take, for instance, the release of Google Glass. It was hyped up big time, right? But it totally stumbled on privacy concerns and limited functionality, which kind of spooked consumers away. Then there's the case, of Friendster, rushed to market without the backbone needed to support heavy traffic. Classic examples of too fast, too loose, don't you think? What are some other epic fails that come to mind for you, man?
Uh, yeah, Joe, you nailed those examples. But let me toss another one into the mix. Remember the whole Juicero debacle? That was like an MVP gone hilariously wrong. They rolled out this super expensive juicing machine that was supposed to be all high tech and stuff. But then, bam, it turns out you could just squeeze the juice packs with your hands. No machine needed. Talk about missing the mark on necessary functionality. And there's also the story of the Microsoft Zune. Tried so hard to rival the iPod, but just couldn't catch up in terms of usability or cool factor. It's kind of like showing up to a scooter race on a unicycle. Both these cases, they kind of show how not fully baking your product features or misjudging what users actually want can just tank your whole MVP game. What do you think? Was it just bad timing, or were these ideas maybe a bit off from the get-go?
Yeah, Simon. These cases like Juicero and Zune really put a spotlight on the importance of matching market needs and expectations. It's not just about slapping an MVP label on something and hoping it flies. Take Juicero. Its core value got totally undermined by, its own design simplicity, making the tech unnecessary. And with Zune, Microsoft kind of missed the cultural wave that Apple was riding with the iPod. Bad timing and misjudgment sure play their parts, but these examples show that understanding user experience and societal context are just as critical. It's kind of like you have to nail the practicality of the product while also hitting the right cultural notes at the perfect time. So, in my view, those flops weren't just about timing. The concepts themselves were slightly off pitch. What do you think? Are these companies learning from such stumbles, or are we seeing repeats of these mistakes in newer ventures?
Uh, yeah, Joe, that's spot on with the context and user experience. I think some companies definitely learn and dodge these blunders, but you'll always have newcomers stepping right into the same old traps. It's like watching someone slip on the same banana peel over and over. Makes me wonder, are we going to keep seeing more of these face palms, or will startups begin to take a beat to really get it right?
Yeah, that's a good point, Simon. It's like, will they learn from the past, or are they doomed to repeat it? I think there's definitely room for optimism as long as they're paying attention to these lessons. But, human nature tends to follow the path of least resistance and all that. Do you think there's a way for startups to avoid these typical pitfalls without slowing down innovation? What sort of balance should they be aiming for, man?
Joe, while optimism is great and all, I'm not totally convinced everyone's learning their lessons here. It's like, yeah, there's a playbook on avoiding past mistakes, but the rush to be first or groundbreaking often overshadows the wisdom of caution. Look at the tech industry. There's this relentless push for the next big thing, and sometimes that means skimping on user testing or ignoring red flags just to get an MVP out. And considering a balance, it sounds nice in theory, but the real challenge is the intense market pressure startups face. They're constantly being nudged to move faster by investors and competitive threats. So in the heat of those moments, careful planning and learning from the past can kind of take a back seat, you know? It's tricky because slowing down might mean getting scooped by someone else who dared to cut corners and succeeded, even temporarily. What do you think, Joe? Is the pressure too much, or is there a real chance for these businesses to find a middle ground?
Yeah, Simon, you're really hitting the core of it. Like when it comes to tech startups, the fear of missing out, FOMO, it's huge. And with that pressure, mistakes are bound to happen. There's this crucial element of thorough testing and iteration that might just get glossed over in a rush. And if we dive deeper into past failures, what often stands out is that need to fix things post-launch because they simply didn't give products enough trial time to iron out those wrinkles. Like with Samsung's Galaxy Note 7. Remember that? The battery issues that led to recalls because they rushed it? Rushing not only costs companies financially, but also hits their reputation hard, an aspect that can make or break trust with your audience. So, finding that middle ground, it involves weighing risk against potential reward and maybe embracing a bit more like strategic patience. It's definitely tricky, but kind of essential for long-term survival in such a fast-paced market, don't you think?
Absolutely, Joe. It's like walking a tightrope while juggling. You've got to keep your balance with both the rush and the rigor to not drop the ball, or set anything on fire tech-wise. Hey, speaking of balancing acts, what do you think about those startups that actually thrived by doing things more methodically? Like, could slowing down be the new fast track in some tech sectors?
Uh, yeah, Simon, that's an intriguing twist. Slowing down to speed up, kind of like drafting carefully in a race car just before making the big pass, huh? Could be genius for those playing the long game in tech.
Uh, yeah, Joe, like the race car analogy, spot on. It's about that strategic holdup before you zoom ahead. And looking at these MVP disasters, they kind of scream for a need to pause and reassess before launching. This slower approach might seem counterintuitive in a fast paced world, but it can safeguard against those embarrassing flops, right? And really, if the aim is building something sustainable, slowing down could totally prevent those worst case scenarios. Like, imagine if Galaxy Note 7 had just taken a bit more time. No fires, no recalls, maybe a simpler headache. Maybe doing thorough testing isn't as sexy as blitzscaling, but hey, it sure does sound safer and potentially more profitable in the long run. What do you think? Is this slow growth model something we'll start seeing more startups adopt purposely?
Yeah, Simon, I totally agree. That steady, thoughtful approach, it might just be the ticket to avoiding those high-profile mishaps and building something that lasts. And really, who wouldn't want to avoid a Galaxy Note 7 scenario? It makes you wonder if this could kick off a trend where more startups embrace this mindset from the get-go. Wouldn't it be something if slow and steady starts winning the race in tech? What are some other examples where taking a moment really paid off or didn't?
Yeah, Joe. And speaking of taking a moment, it's funny how some startups, even while gunning for that lean and mean approach, end up launching stuff that's lean, all right? But more laughable than lean. It's like they're trying to be disruptive innovators, but wind up disrupting common sense instead. Have you seen some of those products where you just go, what were they thinking?
Yeah, Simon, totally. It's like sometimes they're just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks, but all we get is a mess. Remember that Wi-Fi enabled juicer thing where you didn't even need the machine itself to squeeze the packs? It's hilarious. Talk about missing the mark. And they pitched it as this big innovative breakthrough. Makes you wonder, what's the most ridiculous innovative product you've come across lately?
Yeah, Joe, that juicer story cracks me up every time. And oh man, it reminds me, I ran into this other bizarre product the other day. So there's this startup trying to revolutionize how we use spoons. Yeah, spoons, as in the ones you eat soup with. They created a smart spoon, claiming it could enhance your eating experience by vibrating to stimulate taste buds or something goofy like that. I gave it a whirl, because why not, right? Let me tell you, it was more like eating with a tiny jackhammer than an innovative dining tool. Soup splashing all over, a real mess. Kind of makes you think, are they really solving a problem or just creating new ones for a laugh?
No way, Simon. A vibrating spoon? That's just, wow. It's like they're solving problems that don't even exist. And let's not forget about those Bluetooth-enabled water bottles that remind you to drink water. Like, have we really forgotten how to stay hydrated on our own? It makes you think, is the line between innovative and absurd getting blurrier? What's your take on where that line should be, huh?
Yeah, Joe, that line is definitely getting fuzzy. Innovation should solve real problems, not create weird gadgets. It's like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut, total overkill. We really got to keep it grounded, don't you think?
Absolutely, Simon. Keeping it grounded is key. It's like we got to focus on making things better, not just different for the sake of being different, you know? Innovation should be about clear benefits, simplicity, usability, not just tech for tech's sake. And when you think about it, there are more and more products out there that just make you go, huh? Like who really asked for a smart fork that counts your bites or sneakers that can order pizza? Sometimes it feels like these ideas are more of a punchline than a product, right? What's another example of an innovative product that made you question where we're headed with technology?
Oh, Joe, you hit it right on the nose. It's like everyone's racing to top the charts of weird tech competition or something. Take smart toothbrushes, for instance. They're packed with features like Bluetooth connectivity, sensors to monitor your brushing pressure, and apps that give you feedback on your technique. Originally meant to improve dental hygiene, right? But instead, They often end up making the simple act of brushing teeth overly complex, like turning a routine chore into a high-tech ordeal. And the stats? They just don't justify the hype most times. Few people consistently use these advanced features beyond the novelty wearing off. We've seen from various lifestyle tech adoption studies that while initial uptake can be high, sustained use often drops sharply as users revert to simpler tools that do the job without fuss or extra steps. So what started as a solution in search of a problem becomes just another forgotten gadget in a drawer. Talk about missing the mark. Can you think of any other solutions where things went more comical than practical?
Yeah, Simon, that's spot on about smart toothbrushes. It's like, come on, how many gadgets do we need before we're brushing our teeth in a virtual reality simulation or something? And speaking of over-the-top solutions, have you heard about the internet-connected refrigerator that not only alerts you when you're out of milk, but tries to read your mood by the type of food you grab? Supposedly, if you reach for ice cream a lot, it might suggest lighter alternatives. Like, really? I just wanted a snack, not a diet coach in my fridge. It kind of makes you wonder, are we trying too hard to techify every aspect of daily life? Like, what happened to keeping things simple and effective?
Yeah, Joe. It's like we're making tech to babysit us. Maybe next they'll invent a smart couch that nags us to go for a run every time we binge another episode. What's next? Right?
Yes, Simon, with all these weird and wacky products popping up left and right, it really begs the question about the whole concept of minimum viable product, MVP. You know, constantly rushing to push out the next big thing. Does it compromise the real quality and innovation in tech? Like, where's that line between getting to market fast and actually offering something solid and useful? It seems like this race to launch might be skimming on quality. What's your take on navigating that balance between speed and craftsmanship?
Joe, you're right on the money there. It's like this whole MVP rush could really be shortchanging us on quality. We get these half-baked products that are supposed to be revolutionary, but end up needing patches or updates just weeks after hitting the market. Kind of makes you think, what if we took a tad longer? Maybe iron out those kinks first. It's about finding a balance, right? Like, maybe we need a minimum delightful product. Instead, something that's not only viable, but also solid and satisfying. What do you think about shifting that mindset to value user delight just as much as speed to market?
Yeah, Simon, you're hitting a crucial point about redefining MVP to MDP, minimum delightful product. But I've got to push back a bit here. Given how competitive tech is, slowing down might just make you obsolete. Like, you could perfect your product to death while others iterate, improve, and pivot on feedback. So maybe the real tweak lies in how we gather and implement that user feedback immediately post-launch. Not just throwing stuff out there and seeing what sticks, but having robust mechanisms that turn early users into co-creators, so to speak. That way you're fast, but also aligned with genuine consumer needs and expectations right from the start. What's your take on building that kind of rapid feedback loop into the MVP process?
Yeah, Joe, integrating feedback loops might be the secret sauce here. Historically, if we look back at some top-notch inventions or improvements in tech and other industries, they've often evolved tremendously post-launch based on direct consumer engagement. Take video gaming consoles, for instance. Early versions were pretty basic until real gamers started pushing manufacturers on performance, graphics, and user interfaces. When companies like Sony and Microsoft began incorporating gamer feedback early and often, it led to more sophisticated, gamer-oriented systems that nailed both innovation and practicality. This strategy kind of helped them stay relevant and technologically superior in a fiercely competitive market. Essentially, adapting this method means making tweaks in almost real time, continuously refining the product experience. It challenges the old school set and forget approach and replaces it with dynamic, ongoing development. But here's the deal. It demands robust system infrastructures to manage and analyze feedback efficiently, which could shift how resources are used prior to and even long after product launch. Isn't tackling these operational shifts another layer of the challenge when thinking about evolving MVP strategies?
Uh, Absolutely, Simon. That's a game changer, but also throws in a wrench about scaling. It's like we're in a kitchen trying new recipes, but the stove keeps changing. How do you keep up with that and not burn the dinner?
Yeah, Joe, that kitchen analogy is spot on. Like, think about how startups scale. They're sort of balancing act between innovation, customer feedback, and resource allocation. It's tricky. Studies show almost 90% of startups fail, and a common reason is not understanding market needs. This ties back to the MVP model. If you rush to launch without robust mechanisms for scaling and adapting based on real user data, it's like setting up your kitchen without knowing what meals you need to prepare. Now, taking companies that succeed, say Dropbox or Airbnb, they thrived by incorporating early user feedback into their products, allowing them to scale efficiently while still meeting market demands. But here's the kicker. They invested heavily in systems that could handle this feedback loop from the get-go. So maybe the twist isn't just about rushing to market or slowing down. It's about planning for scale from day one. Setting up infrastructures that support rapid iteration based on user insights could be the recipe for keeping that stove hot but manageable, without burning down the whole kitchen. What do you think about focusing on scalable models right out of the gate?
Yeah, Simon. It's like launching a rocket, but planning for repairs and upgrades while it's still in orbit. Makes total sense to have that scalable model from the get-go.
Exactly, Joe. It's all about that continuous improvement, even when you're already up and running. Really makes you wonder how many more successes we'd see if startups got that balance right from the start, huh? So, like, what do you think are some other key strategies or tools that could help these companies stay flexible, but also firm on their journey?
Uh, Definitely, Simon. One thing that's getting traction is the lean startup methodology, kind of like MVP on steroids. It focuses not just on rapid product release, but agile adaptation based on what's called validated learning. It's a continuous cycle of building, measuring, and learning to improve products quicker. Then there's incorporating technologies like AI for predictive analytics, which can give startups insights into user behaviors even before they become trends. It's like having a crystal ball. Also, embracing failure mode and effects analysis, FMEA, upfront can help startups foresee potential failures in design or concept and allows them to tweak things before they hit bumps down the road. With these kinds of strategic tools integrated from day one, startups aren't just launching products, they're crafting adaptability into their DNA, ensuring they're tuned into ever-evolving market demands. That might have seemed like space-age thinking a decade ago, but now, it's pretty much your ticket if you want to play in the big leagues.
Yeah, Joe. Leveraging lean startup and AI for predictive analytics sounds pretty futuristic. But here's the rub. Does chucking all these high-tech solutions into the mix early on risk complicating things too much for a young startup? Like, sometimes you gotta crawl before you ball, right? Using AI to predict trends is cool and all, but if you're not careful, it could derail your core mission or overwhelm your team with heaps of data that they might not even know what to do with. Do we run the risk of over-optimizing too soon? I mean, don't you think there's value in getting the basics right first before going full sci-fi on your business model?
Yeah, Simon. Overloading with tech can definitely swamp a startup before it even finds its feet. Keeping it simple at first might just be the smarter move. It's crucial to nail down those basics, like understanding your customer's core needs before diving into the deep end of high-tech solutions. Solid foundations first, fancy gadgets later, right?
Totally, Joe. It's like building a house, right? You wouldn't start with the roof before laying down a solid foundation. I reckon that getting those basic customer needs right at the beginning is super crucial. We've seen tons of products bomb because they skipped the basics and went straight for flashy features that nobody really asked for. Remembering that your customers are actual humans, not just data points on spreadsheets, could help keep those MVPs grounded and more successful. So sticking to the roots, deeply understanding what genuinely solves problems, and then gradually layering on the techie stuff as you grow, seems like a formula for sustainable innovation, don't you think?
Exactly, Simon. And, digging even deeper into that foundation-first approach, it's about really knowing who your customer is and what they struggle with daily. Like sometimes there's a gap between what we assume users want based on data and what they actually need from personal experience. So incorporating direct user feedback sessions like focus groups or beta testing with real users before scaling might give startups a clearer picture. This isn't just ticking boxes. It's about creating meaningful interactions that inform your product's evolution. Basics first, then build upon them organically with tech as your stabilizers, not your main frame. Think of it kind of like seasoning food. You add spices bit by bit to enhance the flavor, not all at once, drowning out the original taste. You have to keep it balanced to get it just right. So reflecting back on how people are actually using and benefiting from your product. It's definitely a recipe for more centered and sustainable growth.
Yeah, Joe, hitting the nail right on the head there. Keeping that user at the core and seasoning with tech gradually. It's like cooking up a masterpiece meal, ensuring every ingredient melds perfectly without overpowering the others. This rethinking of MVP into something more dynamic and responsive might just be what launches startups into a new era of innovation, provided they stick to the recipe. Makes you wonder, what other ingredients might we be missing in our current startup ecosystems, huh?
Speaking of pivots, it's a bit like we've seen some epic plot twists in tech stories, huh? Like companies making jaw-dropping shifts that turn them into industry titans. This is where things get really juicy.
Uh, totally, Joe. Like take Instagram, for example. It started off as bourbon, focusing more on check-ins and social networking through plans, yeah? But the big pivot to photo sharing is what really blasted them into superstardom. It's like one day they're playing in a garage band, and then, bam, they're headlining stadiums. And think about Slack. That was an internal tool for a game development team before turning into a communication behemoth. Wild how focusing on different aspects can radically shift the market's response, huh? How do you think companies identify that perfect moment to pivot?
Yeah, Simon, pinpointing that pivot moment, it's like catching lightning in a bottle, right? I think it boils down to really listening, like tuning into your user feedback intensely. It's not just about what users are saying explicitly, but also reading between the lines to grasp unmet needs or frustrations. And there's got to be bravery involved. Like it takes guts to shift gears, especially when you might already be somewhat comfortable. Companies have to be agile, ready to scrap partially built paths if there's a clearer, potentially more successful route illuminated by user demand or technological shifts. So embracing a culture where change is part of the DNA, not just a contingency plan, that's essential. Staying fluid, staying dynamic, always ready to adapt. That's how these big players turn pivotal decisions into massive success stories. What do you think makes a team ready to take that leap and transform completely?
Yeah, Joe, it's that leap of faith mixed with sharp intuition, isn't it? But here's what I think. Sometimes we glorify these pivots like they were always destined to succeed. It ain't always rainbows and butterflies. Like the real game changer must be having a team that's not just ready, but eager to pivot when needed. It takes a mindset shift to say, okay, this path we're on, maybe it's not the one. That kind of flexibility seems crucial. And the timing, uh, getting the timing right, that's tricky. Jump too early or too late, and you might miss out entirely. It's kind of like double Dutch jump rope. Timing that jump into the ropes needs to be spot on, or you're going to face plant. So essentially, companies that pivot successfully seem to combine careful listening with like fearless decision making. Think there are lessons there for personal growth too. How so?
Definitely, Simon. It's like personal growth on steroids, constantly tweaking who we are and adapting to life's challenges. Just imagine applying startup pivot strategies to ourselves. Now that could lead to some wild transformations, right?
Yeah, Joe, that's a heck of an idea. It reminds me of this one time I decided to pivot from my usual tech-focused career path to dive into podcasting with you. Like at first, it seemed kind of wild, a total left turn from what I was doing. But here's the kicker. Just by embracing that shift and adapting, like those startups we talked about, I found this new passion and a whole new skill set I didn't even know I had. It's like discovering a secret room in your house. This just goes to show, whether it's in tech or our personal lives, having the courage to pivot and embracing new opportunities can lead to some unexpected and amazing outcomes. Kind of makes you think about all the potential shifts waiting around the corner, huh? What do you think is next for us, or anyone listening, to consider shaking up in their own life?
You're spot on, Simon. That's such a cool way to look at personal evolution, like finding hidden rooms. It really does show how pivoting isn't just for tech companies, but for anyone willing to reassess and jump at new paths. So, thinking about that, what do you reckon is a good starting point for someone looking to make their own pivot? Do you think it starts with identifying what's not working? Or is it more about spotting new opportunities that could be more exciting? What's been your approach?
Well, Joe, I'd say it's not just about spotting what's wrong or jumping on new trends. While looking at failures and opportunities is key, maybe a different angle, focusing on core strengths that are like underutilized, might be the more sustainable route. Like, consider using what already works but in a new way. Take Netflix. They use their strength in DVD rental logistics to pivot towards streaming, right? They kind of looked inside first to leverage what they were already good at, but for something bigger. So instead of chasing what might feel broken or shiny and new, digging deep into your own toolkit first could reveal some solid pivots waiting to unfold. It's this blend of introspection with, proactive opportunity seeking that might just provide the perfect balance to effectively pivot. What do you think makes a mix like that successful?
Yeah, Simon, that's a killer point. Using what you've already mastered, but in a fresh arena, can be a huge advantage, like driving with a tested engine in a new kind of race car. It's about blending those internal resources and capabilities with external possibilities and needs. The key might be having a team or even a personal mentality that's geared towards continuous evaluation and readiness to adapt, like always asking, how can this strength be turned into a new opportunity? And context matters too, right? For instance, Netflix saw the writing on the wall with the rise of broadband and streaming tech, fitting it around their logistics prowess at just the right time. So I think success in pivoting likely comes from mixing a profound understanding of one's foundational strengths with an eye keen on how external changes can offer new platforms for leveraging those strengths. Keeps you relevant and competitive without straying too far from what you know best. It's all about finding that balance, huh?
Yeah, Joe. It's like being a magician, but instead of pulling rabbits out of hats, you're pulling out new business models or life changes. Makes you wonder what hidden tricks we all have up our sleeves waiting to be revealed at the right moment, right? What's your secret magic trick, Joe?
Speaking of magic tricks and pulling out new business models, it sort of hones in on that razor-thin line between using intuition and solid data when making those big pivot decisions, right? It's fascinating to think about the psychology behind it. Like, how do tech leaders decide when to stick it out with their current projects or when it's time to completely shift gears?
Uh, yeah, Joe, that's a really juicy topic. It's like this mental tug of war, right? Leaders got to weigh their gut feelings against the hard data. I always wonder, how much do you think a personal hunch plays into these huge decisions? Do they just wake up feeling like, today's the day we flip everything on its head? Or is it more about what the numbers are shouting at them?
Definitely, Simon, it's like a dance between instinct and analysis. I'd say visionary leaders probably lean on data a lot, but there's always that element of gut feeling influencing big moves. Imagine the data paints a picture of trends and facts, right? But the hunch, that's your personal flair or experiences whispering which corners the data might be blind to. And sometimes data can be overwhelming, almost paralyzing. That's where intuition steps in, helping slice through the noise, guiding whether to pivot now or hold off. This interplay ensures decisions aren't just robotic, but also have a human touch, tailored specifically to the scenario. So yeah, those early morning epiphanies are important, but they've got to align somewhat with what the metrics show to really resonate and turn successful.
You got a point there, Joe, about the blend of data and intuition. But let's poke at that a bit more. Don't you think sometimes there's too much reliance on gut feeling? Like it's risky, right? Imagine you wake up one day feeling bold and decide to pivot without solid data backing you up. Sounds like a recipe for disaster. I'm all for adding that human touch, but I mean, in the tech world, shouldn't we be a bit more cautious? This isn't just switching coffee brands, you're talking about major strategic shifts. Shouldn't the data weigh a bit more heavily in these scenarios to prevent potential sinkholes? What's your take on finding that sweet spot between not getting lost in analysis paralysis, but also not jumping the gun too quickly based on a hunch?
Right, Simon, you've hit a crucial part of the dilemma. Absolutely, there's significant risk when gut feeling overshadows data, especially in hefty decisions like tech pivots. The sweet spot, like it's somewhere between being incredibly responsive and overly cautious. The thing is, data can guide us to avoid big missteps, the pitfalls that aren't always evident from a gut reaction alone. But likewise, too much data can bog down decision-making, trapping leaders in endless cycles of analysis. So this balance, it requires a bit of an art form. Leaders need to harness data to illuminate the path, right? But they also need the courage fostered by intuition to take steps down that path even when it's not fully lit. It's about using data to validate or contest your gut, but not letting either paralyze the other. This synergy is what really crafts those visionary moves we see changing the game in tech.
Totally, Joe. It's like they're surfing on waves of data, using intuition as their surfboard. Without the board, they'd drown in information. Without the waves, they'd just be stuck on the beach going nowhere. Makes you wonder how many big tech shifts happened because someone had a wild idea in the shower, huh?
Yeah, Simon, that's a vivid image and spot on. Let's pull in some real examples to flesh this out. Like take Instagram. It started as a check-in app called Bourbon. The data showed low user engagement except for photo sharing, which led Kevin Systrom to pivot the app solely into photos. That gut feeling guided by user behavior turned Instagram into the powerhouse it is today. Or consider Slack. The wild idea originated during development of an online game called Glitch. It wasn't working out, but Stuart Butterfield saw an opportunity in their communication tool. Despite there being tons of messaging platforms already, Slack's pivot was spurred both by keen observation of internal use and intuition that this could meet broader needs. These decisions, part data analysis about existing conditions, part intuitive leap towards what users might crave, even when they can't express it directly. They make all the difference, turning good ideas into great executions, shaping tech landscapes.
Yeah, Joe, those are some stellar examples. It reminds me of this time back in college when I was part of this startup group. We were trying to create an app for organizing study groups, but it wasn't picking up traction. Customer feedback was sluggish. So there we were, gathering data through surveys, the usual jazz, but it just wasn't providing clear directions. Then one evening, while all of us were piled into this tiny dorm room, struggling with scheduling, I mean really schedules everywhere, it just hit us. Why not pivot our app to tackle this exact mess? We swung from a broad concept to a targeted scheduler for student projects and exams based on real-time campus-wide demand. The pivot wasn't purely data-driven, nor a shot in the dark. It was prompted by direct personal pain points and bolstered later by the data that supported these wider-scale issues. Like with Instagram and Slack, sometimes you start with a plan until life or your users kind of nudge you toward what they actually need, blending these scraps of data with everyday experiences. This synergy can often point out the real game changers before the data can catch up. What do you think? Are these signals always as clear, or is it also about being at the right place at the right time to see them?
Absolutely, Simon. It's like a treasure hunt without the map. You're gathering clues from everywhere: data, user pain points, your own aha moments. Spotting those signals is partly about sharp observation and partly, well, luck. Being in that right spot at the right time to connect the dots others might miss. Makes you think, how many potential breakthroughs are we walking past every day just because we didn't piece together the clues?
Yeah, Joe, it's like life sprinkling Easter eggs all over the place, waiting for us to spot them. Makes you wonder, what's the next big thing we're just strolling past right now? Maybe our listeners have stumbled onto something game-changing and haven't even realized it yet. What do you guys think? Got any wild ideas or unnoticed Easter eggs to share?
Uh, right on, Simon. Isn't it thrilling to think about what might be lurking just below the surface of our everyday experiences, waiting to be uncovered? So, hey, listeners, we're all ears here. Do you have any tiny inklings or side projects you've been pondering that might just need a little nudge to bloom into something bigger? What's cooking in those brilliant minds of yours?
Absolutely, Joe. It's all about staying curious and open to those nudges, whether they come from data or gut feelings. Listeners, think about that one project or idea you've shelved. Might be the perfect time for a revisit, huh? Who knows what successes are just waiting for that right pivot? Keep those gears turning, and maybe next time we'll dive even deeper into the twists and turns of making those pivotal decisions. What do you say, Joe? Ready to explore more hidden clues in our next chat?
Totally, Simon. Staying curious and revisiting old projects is key. But while we're talking pivots and possibilities, it can be super enlightening to also look at the flip side when pivots don't go as planned. Like there are some legendary flops out there that have just as much to teach us, maybe even more. What do you think about taking a humorous yet instructive look at some of those big tech blunders next time? Could be a riot and pretty insightful.
Uh, that sounds entertaining, Joe. But there's a side to me that can't help but cringe thinking about those fails. It's like watching a movie where you already know the hero's going down. Painful, but you can't look away. But seriously, looking at these flops isn't just about getting a laugh. They teach us valuable lessons, like take the Microsoft Zune. Remember that? Tried to go toe-to-toe with the iPod by pivoting from their usual tech products, and well, we all know how that ended. The execution was off, missing what users actually wanted, focusing too much on features that no one really asked for. And it shows how vital understanding your audience is before making massive shifts. Each flop kind of underlines the need for extensive market research and clearer vision alignment. So yeah, diving into these failures could actually shed some light on what not to do and remind us why exactly the stumbles happened. What do you think? Should we dig up some more examples and see what goes into creating these notorious tech busts?
Absolutely, Simon. I think we'll find that these tales of tech gone wrong are not just cautionary, but surprisingly instructive. Like, did you ever hear about Google Glass? Hit the scene with a ton of hype, wearing the internet on your face, right? But it flopped, mainly because it kind of ignored privacy concerns, and there wasn't really a clear everyday use for most folks. Makes you ponder, doesn't it? About how essential it is to hit that right note between innovation and actual user needs. You think it's that gap between what technologists see as revolutionary and what everyday users find practical that often leads to these major fails.
Yeah, Joe, exactly. It's like creators get stuck in an echo chamber of awesome without checking if anyone outside the lab cares. Taking Google Glass as an example, it was a tech marvel, sure, but rushed into markets without addressing how creepy it felt for non-users to interact with wearers who might be filming them without consent. Launched in 2013, this $1,500 piece of hardware quickly became synonymous with privacy invasion and social awkwardness. Or how about Amazon's Fire Phone? Introduced in 2014, designed to tie users deeper into Amazon's ecosystem, it flopped hard due to its high price and gimmicky features. The phone tried doing too much at once without excelling in any area that consumers really cared about, leading to its discontinuation just a year later, costing Amazon nearly $170 million. These stories, man, they're not just about the wacky products, but also a stark reminder. Know your market and involve potential users early on. Kind of makes you think, are we listening to what people need, or are we just pushing what we think is cool onto them?
Spot on, Simon. It's like, are we inventing for a better future or just making expensive paperweights? Let's keep peeling back the layers next time. Dig deeper into these wild rides of innovation gone off track, huh? There's a goldmine of lessons hidden in those mishaps.
For sure, Joe. It's like navigating through a tech jungle. You gotta know where to hack through with your machete and where to tread carefully. Reminds me of the time back when I tried starting this custom gadget business, right? Thought everyone would love a touch of personal flair on their devices. So, invested like crazy in these quirky designs and funky colors. Thought I was onto something huge. But what did I miss? Not everyone thinks like me, thankfully, right? Because it turned out only a small group actually cared about turning tech into fashion statements. My little venture didn't just flop, it belly flopped hard. Staring at boxes of unsold stock really nailed in the importance of not just loving your idea, but making sure there's a genuine need out in the wild. Would have been great if I'd tested those waters a bit before diving headfirst, huh? How about we dig more into this next time? See what other great ideas turned out to be less than great for the masses.
Uh, Definitely, Simon. It's like the tech world's version of fashion faux pas, but costlier. There are probably heaps more stories where the hype didn't quite match the reality. Breaking down those not-so-golden moments can really add some salt to our dish here. I'm making a note. We should totally dive into tales of mismatched market expectations next time. Who knows what other wild misadventures we might uncover.
Absolutely, Joe. It's like opening up a treasure chest of lessons with each flop story, each one packed with insights masked as mistakes. Can't wait to crack open some more tech misadventure tales next time. Who knows what other hilarious twists and turns await in the world of innovation gone wrong. See you then, folks.
Speaking of innovations that didn't quite make the cut, Simon, it makes me wonder about the next wave of tech. Like, what's on the horizon? What predictions can we make about where the tech industry is headed, considering both our lessons from past flops and the wild ideas we see in sci-fi books and films? Let's pivot to forecasting future tech trends. What do you think might be the next big shift?
Well, Joe, with all these swings and misses we've seen, it's kind of like throwing darts in the dark when predicting tech trends, huh? But hey, let's take a stab at it. Riding off the back of what we see in sci-fi often serves as a neat blueprint for the future, right? So think about it, augmented reality. It got some hype a while back, crashed a bit, but with what we learned from those fails, like privacy with Google Glass, I think AR could make a massive comeback. Maybe something more seamless that integrates deeply without being in your face or on your face like before. And then there's AI, Joe, which is already everywhere. But imagine AI that's even more tailored to personal needs without crossing into creepy territory. A delicate balance, right? Think less Big Brother vibes and more like a super smart assistant that thinks 2 steps ahead of you. What do you reckon about pushing borders in biotech too? We've read about mind-controlled limbs and biohacking in books. Might not be so far-fetched to say that soon, tech could pivot hard towards enhancing physical capabilities or even extending life itself. These pivots better be more hit than miss, though, don't you think?
You're hitting some massive points there, Simon. Diving deeper into that AR idea, it's like we've seen where the missteps happened with too much tech too soon, scaring folks off. But if we learn from that and developers focus on subtler, more integrated experiences, like enhancing how we interact with our environments without those bulky headsets or privacy issues, that could be a game changer. And about AI, right? It's not just helping you schedule meetings anymore, but could evolve to predict personal health needs or automate your home environment in really nuanced ways. The key is making sure it keeps feeling helpful without stepping over into invasive territory, maintaining that user trust. Then you mentioned biotech. Seriously fascinating stuff. Combining tech with biology could lead to breakthroughs in how we treat diseases or manage disabilities. Like think smaller, smarter implants, or even genetic modifications that are more ethically sound and publicly accepted. Each of these trends has a runway based on current tech, but requires careful navigation to avoid past pitfalls. Building on solid ground, that's the trick to making sure these aren't just the next big hype, but actually meaningful shifts in our tech landscape.
Oh, absolutely, Joe. It's like tech developers are walking a tightrope between wildly innovative and downright intrusive. Getting that balance right, that's the million-dollar question. And imagine combining all three, AR, AI, and biotech, into a single device. What a mind-bender that would be, huh? Could be groundbreaking or could explode in our faces, literally.
Seriously, Simon, a device that blends AR, AI, and biotech? I mean, we're basically talking about stepping straight into a sci-fi movie. It's either the coolest thing to ever happen or the start of an epic techno dystopia. Let's keep our fingers crossed it's the former, huh?
Yeah, Joe. Let's hope it's the former, because I'm not exactly itching to live in a world where my coffee maker knows more about my morning mood than I do. Imagine waking up to your smart toaster saying, maybe lay off the butter today, buddy.
I get you, Simon. That's a little too intrusive for breakfast. While we're on it, let's not forget the potential backlash. There's this thin line between helpful and freaky that tech developers need to tread. Like, think about all these innovations we're predicting. How do they fare against current privacy concerns and ethical debates? Taking AR and AI into account, if merged unthoughtfully, could lead to some pretty gnarly privacy invasions, or worse, manipulation scenarios. Sure, it sounds cool for a machine to know you better than you know yourself, but there's got to be limits, right? Sometimes tech needs to cool its jets, make sure what's developed respects personal boundaries more than just pushing what's technically possible. Thoughts on setting those boundaries, or is it all just inevitable?
Yeah, Joe, you're hitting the nail right on its head there. We've got to set some serious boundaries, or we're just asking for trouble down the line. Like with this blend of AR and AI, the tech itself isn't inherently good or bad, right? It's how we use it that makes all the difference. So maybe, like, developers could implement what we'll call privacy by design. This means building products from the ground up with privacy as a core principle, not just a sticker slapped on as an afterthought. Transparency about data usage and giving control back to users should be the norm, not the exception. And let's talk ethics for a sec. Remember when just simple websites had to start asking for cookies permissions because everyone got freaked out? Imagine the user agreements we'd need for something that predicts personal health needs or adjusts your living environment. Developers need to be super clear about benefits and risks, standing firm on ethical grounds, even if that means pulling back on some of that wild innovation. So yes, it's definitely possible to innovate without invading. It's kind of a tightrope, sure, but absolutely necessary to walk it carefully to keep tech advancements grounded in what improves lives without creeping people out.
Absolutely, Simon. It's almost like tech developers need a Hippocratic oath of their own. First, do no harm to privacy or ethics. That'd sure keep things interesting and a bit safer as we step into the future of tech innovations, huh? What a world that would be.
Oh man, Joe, speaking of keeping tech innovations on track and not creepy, that whole loop of trying, tweaking, and trying again brings us bang into the world of iterative design. This is where the magic or mess-ups really happen in shaping our gadgets. It's like perfecting a recipe. Each version hopefully tastes a bit better, right?
Yeah, Simon, that's a spot-on analogy with the recipe. Iterative design is like constantly taste testing and tweaking your dish based on what the dinner guests say. Every feedback loop gives developers crucial insights, making the next version better tailored to user needs, right? So I'm wondering, how do you think companies like Apple or Samsung use this iterative feedback to refine their gadgets? They seem to always bring something new to the table with each release. What's your take on that?
Yeah, Joe. When you look at big guns like Apple or Samsung, it's clear they've mastered the art of iterative design. Every model they roll out is like an answer to a barrage of user feedback. And not just the praise, but the gripes too. Like, think about iPhones. Remember when they removed the headphone jack with the iPhone 7? Major uproar over that. Fast forward, and we see how they shifted gears towards improving their wireless tech, which brought us those AirPods. Smooth move in hindsight, right? And Samsung, they're no slouch either. After the whole Galaxy Note 7 fiasco, yeah, the one that liked to catch fire, they doubled down on battery safety, pushing out subsequent devices that are both safer and more robust. Each updated version shows a keenness not just to innovate, but to rectify past shortcomings, making each model smoother, faster, and more aligned with what users actually want. Even the small tweaks tell us that nothing's trivial when iterating designs based on user experiences. It's super cool to see the evolution. What do you think? Companies could speed up this process, or is the pace just right?
You're right about the giants like Apple and Samsung, Simon. They've been at it with what seems like a laser focus on polishing off the rough edges. But there's this part of me that wonders if they could push the envelope just a bit more each round. Like take iterative design in tech, for instance. We see these minor tweaks, which no doubt enhance user experience, but sometimes it feels a bit too safe, doesn't it? They wait for a huge pool of feedback before making changes, which is smart, no doubt. But could this approach be slightly bolder? Imagine a scenario where instead of just nixing the headphone jack or tweaking battery safety, these companies took even larger leaps based on predictive analytics or emerging user behaviors that aren't yet mainstream. Kind of preemptive strikes in innovation. Sure, there's risk in moving too fast. You don't want another Note 7 episode, but maybe there's a sweet spot. It could mean earlier adaptations to market shifts or better anticipation of user needs. I don't know, Simon, do you think tech firms playing it a bit too cautious sometimes holds back bigger, faster progress?
Oh, absolutely, Joe. It's like they're tiptoeing in a field of eggshells. Playing it too safe can totally stifle the kind of radical innovations that shake up the industry. I mean, where's the thrill if we're just inching ahead, right? Could tweaking their risk dial just a notch give us something mind-blowingly different for once?
Exactly. It's like, what if they threw caution to the wind and gave us something so out there it changes everything? I mean, imagine the possibilities if tech giants embraced a little more of that risk-taking spirit. What kind of wild, innovative gadgets might we be talking about then, Simon?
Yeah, Joe, that's a wild thought. Imagine if they really went for it, like developing a phone that seamlessly morphs its shape based on the user's needs, or something as nutty as a gadget that can holographically project your virtual presence in real time to another place. Wouldn't that just blow the lid off the traditional use of smartphones? But here's a kicker. Do you think the general crowd is ready to jump on such advanced tech, or would they shy away, thinking it's too sci-fi for daily grind?
That's a killer point, Simon. It really boils down to how these tech marvels are introduced and integrated into daily life. If they're rolled out in a way that feels natural and adds genuine value, not just as fancy gimmicks, then I think people could definitely get on board, even if it sounds a bit sci-fi now. It's all about laying the groundwork through iterative design, right? Like start with smaller, understandable improvements that resonate well. Gradually introduce more advanced features as users become more comfortable and see the practical benefits. This should help bridge that gap between too futuristic and everyday useful. What do you reckon? Is that a plausible route for these guys to kind of warm people up to next-gen tech?
Totally, Joe. It's like trying to get your grandpa to start using TikTok. You don't just throw him in with the teenagers doing dance challenges. You ease him in with cute animal videos and slowly ramp up from there. Before you know it, he's going viral for his rendition of the floss. It's all about those baby steps, man.
You've nailed it with the grandpa analogy, Simon. But here's where I might push back a bit. While easing into innovation sounds comfy and all, maybe sometimes it's too slow, especially in tech. Like, think about it. Technology moves so fast. Are we possibly missing out on breakthroughs because we're too careful? Taking our iterative design chat further, what if companies intersperse those baby steps with occasional giant leaps? Kind of like surprise drops or experimental lines that test the waters for radical concepts without fully committing yet. Imagine this. Alongside their main product updates, a company like Apple releases a limited edition device yearly, something that's way out of the left field, like that holographic phone idea you mentioned. It could give them real-time market feedback and drive faster innovation based on actual user interest rather than just anticipated needs shaped by slow incremental updates. Doesn't that sound like a recipe to speed things up and keep users engaged, always anticipating what's next?
Joe, that's a solid point. It's like when I decided to upgrade my dad's old flip phone to a smartphone. Honestly, it was like teaching a cat to text at first, but hear me out. So there's this one time we're at this family barbecue, right? And my dad's trying to take a picture with his new smartphone, a moment in itself. He's fumbling around, and everyone's chuckling, offering bits of advice like tap here or swipe there. It's chaotic, but helpful, kind of like real-time user feedback. Then, out of nowhere, my little cousin grabs the phone, adds a filter, boom, suddenly Dad looks like a space explorer in the photo. Everyone burst out laughing, including him. But here's the kicker. That quirky feature, totally unexpected and by accident, got him excited about exploring more gadgets on his own. So yeah, these surprise elements or big leaps in tech can completely change someone's engagement level. Like, they break the monotony and offer fresh, unexpected ways to interact with technology, making users not just comfortable, but actually thrilled about what's coming next. Just like my dad eventually getting stoked about features beyond basic texting on his new smartphone. Who knew, right?
No way, Simon. That story's a class act. Brilliant way to round off today's chat about taking tech leaps and the magic of iterative design. You've got to love how those unexpected twists bring out the tech enthusiast in anyone. All right, folks, you've been awesome sticking around for today's ride on the Infinite Podcast. Big thanks for tuning in and making it another cracking session with your favorite hosts. Make sure you're back here tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. We'll have more intriguing talks, probably some laughs, and definitely more to think about. Until then, stay curious and keep exploring the edges of tech and beyond. Catch you next time.
Absolutely, Joe. And hey, remember folks, every giant leap in tech started with someone daring to take the first small step or slip on a banana peel of innovation. Tune in next time to see what slips or steps we're chatting about next.
Ha, you're right, Simon. Speaking of tech evolutions, smartphones practically reinvent themselves with every update. Every tiny tweak seems steeped in user feedback and futuristic planning. It's like watching a sci-fi novel unfold in real life, each chapter more advanced than the last. What future trend are you keeping your eye on?